So today, we're going to dive into a really intense and fascinating chapter of colonial history, the British project in India. And this wasn't just about grabbing land. It was a full-on battle for hearts and minds, and their chosen weapon to reshape an entire nation? Education. Let's get into it. All right, let's kick things off with a question that was right at the heart of the British imperial mindset. And it's a provocative one. How do you civilize an entire nation? I mean, this single question drove one of the most ambitious and, let's be honest, controversial social engineering projects in all of history. You see, for a lot of folks back in Britain, ruling India wasn't just about money or power. No, they saw themselves on this grand civilizing mission. They genuinely believed it was their duty to change the very fabric of Indian society, the customs, the values, the way people thought, to, in their minds, improve it. So that brings us to our first section. How on earth did the British plan to pull off this massive and, frankly, pretty arrogant mission? What tools were they even going to use to try and reshape a culture that was thousands of years old? Well, their weapon of choice was education. The idea was to build a whole new system from the ground up to shape the next generation. But that immediately kicked off a huge problem, a really fierce debate among the British themselves about what this civilizing education should even look like. And that leads us straight into the core conflict of our story, the Great Education Debate. Now, this wasn't some boring policy discussion. Oh no. This was an ideological war for the soul of India's future, fought between two really powerful British factions. On one side, you had a group called the Orientalists, and on the other, the Anglicists. These two camps had completely, and I mean completely, opposite views on the value of Indian culture and knowledge. And their clash, it would end up deciding the future for millions of people. So first up, the Orientalists. Think of scholars like the linguist William Jones, who actually developed a deep respect for India's ancient traditions. They learned languages like Sanskrit and Persian, and their whole argument was, hey, if we're going to govern India well, we have to understand its philosophy, its laws, its history. They wanted to promote this ancient learning, not get rid of it. But the Anglicists, they saw things totally differently. They basically launched an all-out attack on the Orientalist view. They claimed that all Eastern knowledge was, and this is a quote, full of errors and unscientific thought. For them, the only path forward was to just sweep away all of Indian learning and replace it with what they saw as superior Western education. And the undisputed champion, the front man for the Anglicist cause, was this man right here, Thomas Babington Macaulay. He was a hugely influential official, and his powerful and incredibly blunt arguments would absolutely tip the scales in this debate. Just listen to this. In 1835, Macaulay famously declared that a single shelf of a good European library was worth the whole native literature of India and Arabia. Wow. I mean, that one quote just perfectly captures the complete contempt of the Anglicist position. It really was the final nail in the coffin for the Orientalists. Okay, so Macaulay and the Anglicists win. The debate is over. That brings us to our next section, where we're going to look at the huge consequences of this decision, the creation of a brand new top-down school system designed to remake India in Britain's own image. And the outcome was clear and swift. The Anglicists won, period. The English Education Act of 1835 was passed. It made English the official language for all higher education. And just like that, all government funding for promoting traditional learning in Sanskrit and Persian was cut. The change was total. But to really get the impact of this, you have to ask, right? What was there before? Well, according to reports from the 1830s by a Scottish missionary named William Adam, India already had this huge, vibrant network of over 100,000 local schools. They were called pathshalas. And this table just lays out the difference so clearly. The traditional pathshala system was incredibly flexible. Classes might be held under a banyan tree or in a local shop. The schedule would actually pause during harvest time, so kids from farming families could go work in the fields, and fees were based on what your parents could afford. The new British system, it was the complete opposite. Rigid timetables, fixed fees, annual exams, and one curriculum for everyone. If you couldn't show up every day, on time, you were just seen as undisciplined. This whole new system was then cemented in 1854 with a policy called Wood's Despatch. This basically became the official blueprint. It argued that European learning would, 1, improve the moral character of Indians, 2, it would produce a class of trustworthy civil servants to help run the colonial government, and 3, it formally set up the entire educational structure we see today, from primary schools all the way up to universities. But you can't just force a foreign system on a country and not expect some pushback. In our final section, we'll see how Indian thinkers and nationalists started to powerfully challenge this, imagining a totally new kind of education, one that was truly for the Indian nation. Mahatma Gandhi, I think, summed up this feeling of cultural loss just perfectly. He said that English education had crippled Indians, distanced them from their own culture, and ultimately it had made us strangers in our own lands. That really captures the deep sense of alienation that so many people felt. So the nationalist critique was pretty simple. This colonial education wasn't meant to empower people. No, it was designed to create a sense of inferiority. And so Indian leaders started asking a really important question. What would a truly national education, one rooted in Indian values and serving Indian needs, what would that actually look like? And what's so fascinating is that even among the nationalists, there were different ideas. So let's look at 2 of the most powerful but very distinct visions for a national education, coming from 2 giants, Mahatma Gandhi and the great poet and thinker Rabindranath Tagore. Gandhi was a fierce critic of this whole Western education model. For him, learning had to be in Indian languages first and foremost. He argued that education wasn't just about reading books. It had to be practical. It should teach a craft, connect to real lived experience. The goal for him was to develop a person's mind and their soul, building self-reliance and cultural pride. Now, Rabindranath Tagore, he took a different approach. He actually founded his own school called Shantiniketan, which means the abode of peace. He believed the rigid British schools just killed a child's natural curiosity and creativity. His vision was for a school set in nature, free from all that strict discipline, a place that would foster art and wonder. And unlike Gandhi, Tagore actually wanted to combine the best of both worlds, the best of Indian tradition with the best of modern Western learning. And that really brings us to our final thought. This whole battle over education in colonial India proves that it can be an incredibly powerful tool, either for liberation or for control. And it forces us to ask, as we look at our own systems today, what is the ultimate purpose of education now? Is it to make us conform, or is it to help us create?